Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Films and Stuff. I'm Ethan. I'm joined by Pete. And Pete, what do we have on tap for today?
Ethan, we've got our very usual stream or skip episode.
Oh, man. Pete, you recap the rules, and then I'll recap kind of where we are in terms of trends that we've seen.
Okay.
15 seconds or less rules for the listeners who haven't heard it before.
All right. Ethan and I have prepared lists of TV shows and movies for each other. Every week, we randomly assign one of those shows to watch. We each watch at least 2 episodes or 30 minutes if it's a feature-length film. And based on that, we determine if our show is worthy of being streamed or skipped.
And the last few weeks, I think that we have really challenged each other by trying to find some hidden gems, if you will.
Yeah.
And you and I have both dug deep into Netflix, into Apple TV Plus, into Amazon Prime, into Hulu. We've really dug deep to try to unearth some hidden gems. I think that strategy has backfired on us a little bit because using our rating system, we haven't found any must-subscribes in quite some time. We found a few mooches, but the majority of what you and I have been assigning to each other has been skips, which is, happy for listeners, a public service so that they can skip the things that are worthy of being skipped and they don't waste their time on it. But we really need to unearth, I think, a few more hidden gems. And that's something that we have not done, at least in the past few weeks. And bad news, spoiler alert, I don't think that trend has ended this week, has it?
No, it has not. So before we get into it, though, I will say last week I was assigned quarterback.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Quarterback on Netflix was solid.
I had given it a mooch at the time, but as we are wont to do, and of course, as these kinds of things go, the more a show marinates, the more it sits in your mind, the more you think about it.
Yeah.
I'm actually quite happy to say it's a must subscribe for me now.
Whoa, retroactive grade change.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. I thought about it a lot. And so I did a little bit more research on the show. What I didn't know at the time was that this was a Peyton Manning-led production.
I did know that.
That's probably why he was able to secure such good access to these players and their personal lives.
Yeah.
Because Peyton Manning is a legend in the NFL community, right? I mean, not just as a player, but even as a color commentator now and as an analyst. I think his father was also a football player. His brother's a football player. They're all kind of part of the NFL legacy, if you will.
Yeah.
And apparently, I also found out he has been struggling to find other players for the next season.
Oh, really?
Yeah. This was supposed to be a multi-season show. Despite the fact that, quarterback was actually very well received by the community overall, or at least the sports community overall, there's still a risk, right, for players that they don't want to come off negatively, especially while they're still playing, especially while there's still contract talk still happening. So I can understand why it would be difficult for everyone to sign on. People like Patrick Mahomes, he's a safe bet, because he's kind of like a star. He's like a celebrity. He's also got a secured contract. I think he's a little bit more confident and self-secure. Whereas I think most people would be more afraid to be in Marcus Mariota's position, where they're struggling. They're not sure where their playtime is going to be. They don't want to amplify that with a Netflix show.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the job is stressful enough without having the cameras kind of poking into your personal life as well.
Yeah.
And if you've got anything kind of like dicey coming up in the next year, you probably want to keep that private and not have that publicly disseminated for everyone to kind of pick apart.
if you win, it's a huge win for the show.
Yeah.
Like, it's a great success story.
Yeah.
But if you lose, it's kind of unceremonious, right? And we saw that with Mahomes, and we saw that with Mariota. So we'll see if season 2 happens.
Yeah.
I'm sure if there's anyone who can pull it off, it's Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
But anyway, I thought I'd just give you a quick update on that.
So you've got a retroactive grade change. Quarterback is now a must subscribe. So I take back everything I said about not assigning you good shows.
But the point you make is absolutely solid, because, I mean, if you want to look, out of my last 10 shows, 5 of them have been skips.
And 1 must subscribe.
1 must subscribe. I mean, you're looking at a 10% success rate.
In reality, that's not a bad success. I mean, that's probably about right. Again, we're intentionally not taking the highlight shows that we both want to watch, and we discussed those on a different episode of Films and Stuff, but we're intentionally trying to uncover those diamonds in the rough. So if 10% is a must subscribe and 50% are kind of mooches, that probably seems about right, given our strategy for this segment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. Because again, for those of you who are new to Streamer Skip, the point of our lists is that these are shows that Pete and Ethan don't normally watch.
Yeah.
Because we're obviously going to watch the latest Star Wars show. We're obviously going to watch shows that we're already been fans of, from previous seasons.
Yeah.
That's fine. The point is, how do I find the next diplomat?
The bear.
How do we find the next bear? How do we find the next beef? How do we find these next shows?
Yeah.
I would never have watched Beef, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would never have watched
Beef.
the Diplomat.
I wouldn't have watched Bear.
Yeah.
Diplomat, maybe, only because it's so high profile on Netflix, but I wouldn't have rushed out to do it.
Exactly.
Okay. So what did I assign you this week?
Without further ado, this week I had an animated show on Netflix called Mulligan.
Mulligan.
A little bit of background. I am a huge fan of mature animated shows. So when I say mature animated shows, I mean animated shows that have themes that are a lot more adult oriented. So teenage Pete was a fan of The Simpsons.
Family Guy.
I have now drifted away from those. But for example, I was a huge fan of Archer. I was a huge fan of Gravity Falls, Final Space, these kinds of shows. Loved. I think they're great. So I always look forward to animated shows that have an adult skew. Spoiler alert, not a fan of Mulligan.
Okay.
So the premise is that an alien species invades and attacks Earth, thoroughly decimates and destroys the planet. However, in a last-ditch effort, one guy is able to defeat the aliens because it's like Independence Day. He blows up the mothership with a lucky baseball throw at an exhaust port, just like in Star Wars. Destroys the mothership, and all the other ships on the planet die.
Okay.
So the Earth is now decimated. It's basically like a post-apocalyptic scenario. And because he was the guy that destroyed the mothership, he gets elected president of the United States.
Is his name Mulligan?
His name is Matty Mulligan.
Okay.
So the Earth is in shambles. So what he does is, he's never been president before. He's not a smart guy. He's like, your stereotypical jock, so not very smart. Yeah. He wants to get married to the former Miss America. They get engaged. She breaks up with them because her thing is like, okay, we need to save the animals. And the zoo has the only working generator in Washington, D.C., and he takes that generator so that he can take her out on a date or something stupid like that. And because of that, the animals in the zoo die. And so he puts together a cabinet. His vice president is this old white guy who's supposed to be like a Mitch McConnell type, played by Dana Carvey.
Oh, Dana Carvey.
His scientist is like this super genius lady doctor played by Tina Fey, but they play up the fact that she's a woman doctor, so She's struggling with her 2 kids. She's single, and she keeps repeating these lame jokes about not having anyone who can take care of her kids because she needs childcare. And, this feminism, like I can have it all kind of thing. That whole stereotypical shtick.
Yeah.
It gets super lame, super quick.
Oh,
And
no.
it's just not a fun trope because they don't take it anyplace new. It's like that old stereotypical view. It's kind of silly. It's just not great. It's not fun. None of it kind of stood out to me. Other than Dana Carvey and Tina Fey, the other notable voice that I recognized was Daniel Radcliffe.
Oh, yeah. Harry Potter.
Yeah, Chrissy Teigen plays the former Miss America.
Okay.
It's a skip. The premise is fine because the premise is kind of secondary, but it just wasn't funny. It was trying to be a comedy, but it just wasn't funny. It's just not worth your time.
Okay. Even a skip and a bad review is useful for listeners. Now
Absolutely.
they know, don't waste your time on Mulligan.
So let's swiftly move on.
Oh,
What
yeah.
did you have this week?
I had a comedy on Netflix called Fisk. It's a Australian comedy. It was released at the end of 2021, and I think it's on television in Australia. They say that it's 2 seasons, but what that really means is that it's 2 seasons of 6 episodes each.
Yeah.
So for Netflix purposes, it's just 1 season of 12 episodes. So a few things. This is a comedy similar to what you've seen in The Office, both the US Office and the British Office. It's meant to be comedy around very subtle office politics and intricacies. It's also very similar. Remember when I was assigned Hard Sell with Catherine Tate, which is about the female prison in the UK, or also Our Flag Means Death, which is about the pirates. It's intended to be a very witty, very subtle, very clever comedy. It comes off a little bit flat for me. But here's the premise. A female lawyer, her family name is Fisk, and her father apparently is quite a famous judge in this show. Fisk is known because apparently everyone kind of says like, oh, Fisk, as in like Judge Fisk. Her father is like very well known. And of course, that also leads to a little bit of a dynamic where she should probably be a little bit more professionally successful. And she's at a little bit of a rut in her life. So I watched 3 episodes. I didn't get fully into her backstory, but I imagine it's going to be developed a little bit further. But when we meet this character, she is looking for a new job. We find that she has been divorced and that she has lost a job at her prior law firm, which apparently was kind of a prestigious law firm. That was in Sydney. So now she's decided to kind of like start her life all over again. She's moved to Melbourne, and she's basically gone to a very small local law firm where she's practicing what's mostly what I consider like trust and estates, which is helping people with their wills or with family members who have passed and how to disperse their belongings and so forth. We find a little bit of a disclosure that she was apparently fired from her last law firm, and apparently it was for some kind of aggressive behavior towards a client. She may have kind of like yelled at them or talked sarcastically to them. She definitely has a little bit of an attitude. Apart from that, that's really it. Again, just like The Office and Hard Sell, it just kind of bounces between, the local convenience store / coffee shop / office / apartment building with, silly landlord. It's low production value. It's supposedly, funny based on the writing, based on the wittiness, based on the quirks of all the characters. For me, it falls a little bit flat, as I mentioned. Maybe if I even watched like the US Office or the British Office, the first 2 episodes, those would also fall flat. Because to be honest, a lot of the charm of those shows, I mean, if you think about The Office, you need to understand Dwight a little bit. It takes some time to understand Dwight. You need to understand Jim a little bit. It takes a few episodes to kind of understand their quirks and their backstory and who they are. Just like Kramer and Seinfeld, right? He's not that funny in the first episode, but kind of like towards the end of the season, you get to see like his persona and his quirks. Fisk, in theory, could grow on me. It has won a few awards, for its comedy and for its writing. But I have to say, when I've watched 3 episodes, they're all 30 to 45 minutes. Everything is kind of funny, but not funny that I like laugh. Not funny that I keep a joke in my head that I want to kind of like reuse or repurpose with you or with someone else. It's just kind of like, like kind of like that polite little laughter where, it's kind of funny. It's a little bit quirky. It's a little bit silly. It's definitely a comedy, but it hasn't really like made me laugh out loud, slap my knee, or again, I judge it as like a show's got like so many good jokes that I like repurpose them and I use them in my own life and kind of like adapt them and then like basically consider them my own. So I have to say Fisk is a skip. Sometimes, as you know, I give that rating and I feel a little bit guilty about it. Here I don't feel guilty about it, but I don't say it with any malice either. It's just not a great comedy. Absolutely possible that if I pour through 8 to 10 episodes, it would get super funny by episode 10 to 12. But again, our time is valuable. The time of our listeners is valuable. And no one really has the emotional investment to spend 10 episodes trying to feel something out if it's funny or not. If it doesn't start well, you may not be around to find it when it really gets good. So for me, Fisk on Netflix is a skip. And hopefully we get something better for you and for me next week.
Indeed. That's the dream anyway.
So with that in mind, roll the dice and let's see what the assignments are.
Absolutely. So next week, I am staying on Netflix to watch a show called Vortex. I have added it to my list. I have no idea what it is, but I think it's a sci-fi show based on the title and I think the cover art.
Could be promising.
And you are on Apple TV and you're going to be watching Swagger.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited to watch that.
Kevin Durant story.
Is it the Kevin Durant story?
That's what I heard, that it's a very loose approximation on his story. I think he's like an executive producer on the show or something like that.
Okay. I have to say, I've seen Swagger plastered all over Apple TV Plus. Have not ever tried it or watched it, but I'm intrigued to check it out, I have to say.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts on it because A, you're a fan of sports in general.
True.
B, you're a fan of Apple TV.
True.
C, sports season is kind of ramping up now. And so, we've got a lot of interests that are kind of peaking at this time.
What do you think of this trend, though? There seems to be also this trend where sports stars more and more are kind of financing their legacy, right?
Yeah. And if not legacy films, but like films that they've always wanted to do. Like I think LeBron was the first one to start that off.
Yeah.
Most famously, at least off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone who did a better job than Michael Jordan with Space Jam back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Off of that, LeBron has kind of wanted to emulate that career arc even more so.
Yeah.
He did Space Jam 2. He's done a lot of other movies. He's, produced a lot of other series. He's got his own podcast that he's producing on his own TV show as well. So there's a lot of overlap with him in Hollywood. And I think a lot of other athletes are doing the same thing.
I mean, it seems to just be becoming a thing as now, like, you want to kind of recast your legacy or position your story. And the way to do that is to obviously spend some money to have a show made that's loosely based upon your own life, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen that a little bit with, like, in the past, we've seen that with rappers a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Like the easiest person for Eminem to play was Rabbit in 8 Mile, which was very loosely based on his own life, right? We saw 50 Cent do it in, I don't know what he was in, but a few things, including Ghost, which basically he plays himself in one way or another, right? It was always easiest for rappers to kind of play someone that was, similar to themselves. And now obviously basketball players are casting other people to be their alter ego.
So it'll be interesting because I'm not a fan of KD, but I am interested in the show. So it'll be interesting to see how you like it or don't.
I have to say I'm a little bit agnostic plus on Durant, which is I definitely do not dislike him, but I absolutely would not like stand up in a bar and like defend him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying like physically, I'm saying like verbally, you know, like if someone's like, oh, he's the worst and he's bad and he's not a nice guy, I don't think that I'd like exchange any words and try to talk someone out of that opinion. I feel very, very neutral about him. I guess that's why maybe the swagger will be good for me to watch because I don't really have an opinion, right? Like if you love someone, either you love the show or you're like, that show doesn't do him justice. If you dislike someone, you probably come away from the show saying, well, he's just trying to like rehabilitate his reputation. Here, I'm really neutral. I don't know much about, if anything, about his background, like very, very little. I think he's from like the Washington, D.C., Maryland area. And that's more or less
that's all I really know about him.
All right. So that's it. You've got Vortex. I've got Swagger. We keep our fingers crossed. Hopefully we've got some good shows to report on for next week on Streamer Skip.
Indeed. In the meantime, if you've got any shows that you'd like us to watch and review for you, or if you have any thoughts on Mulligan or Fisk, or maybe you've watched Swagger and Vortex and you want to give your 2 cents before we do, you can tweet at us at F&S Podcast. You can DM us on Instagram at Films and Stuff Podcast. You can email us aloha@filmsandstuffpodcast.com. But obviously, the easiest way to do that is to comment on this video, like it, subscribe to our channel, hit that bell. All of those standard YouTube things helps us out.
All right. Everyone, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Stream or Skip on Films and Stuff. Don't forget to check out our other episodes. We've got a lot to discuss coming up, including Lioness, including Foundation, including all the other stuff that we're watching, so don't miss out on that. Pete, thank you for your time. Listeners, we'll catch up with you on the next episode, okay?
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.